Then it actually, I had taken a long time to search who is the most suitable speaker for the day. I was so lucky during this Vasana period. Bhante Upananda observed the rain retreat at the London Buddhist Vihara. He delivered sermons and also lectures every Thursday evening as well. A lot of people had attended and joined to the online service as well. So therefore, I invited Bhante to deliver this speech. Kindly he accepted the invitation. I know he is so busy monk. Except his busy schedule, he agreed to deliver the speech. It is a customary to introduce, almost you know him very well, but actually his profile is amazing and inspiring. Bhante, Dr. Upananda, Dedunupiti Upananda Thera is an independent scholar, mindfulness teacher and guidance counselor. He holds a PhD in American Mindfulness Studies from the University of Peradeniya, MPhil in South Asian Religions from the University of Cambridge, MA in Comparative Religion from Florida International University, USA, MEd in Teaching English from North Central University, USA, and BA in Pali from the University of Kalenni in Sri Lanka. He has taught Buddhism and world religion in different universities and colleges in different countries and taught mindfulness at US government agencies, schools and community organizations. He is specialized in child, juvenile and marriage and addiction counseling. This is his academic qualification. Apart from that, he is a great experienced teacher. With my respect and gratitude, I would like to invite Bhante Upananda to deliver the speech today regarding our great founder, Anagarika Dharmapala. I think he will explain the topic and he will deliver the speech according to that. Bhante.
Namo Buddhaya, homage to Buddha. Most Venerable Bogota Sri Silimala Nayaka Mahathera, head of London Buddhist Vihara and the Chief Sanghanayaka of Great Britain, Most Venerable Thaulama Bandula Mahathera, Deputy Abbot of London Buddhist Vihara and President of London Rahula Trust, Venerable Sukhitamano, trustees and committee members of London Buddhist Vihara, and my dearest friends in Dhamma. First of all, I must thank Most Venerable Nayaka Mahathera and the trustees and the Anagarika Dharmapala Trust in Colombo for inviting me to deliver this memorial lecture. There are scholarly work and books in abundance written by different scholars across the world, and there are documentaries you can very easily get access to through social media like the YouTube, and you can, when you type in Anagarika Dharmapala in Google, and you are able to download a plethora of writings about the life and service of our founder, Anagarika Dharmapala. This lecture is not going to be that long. I only want to add something to you already know about his life and service. So I thought of coming out of a way to talk about him. That's when we came up with this topic in consultation with the Most Venerable Nayaka Mahathera and the trustees. So the theme for my brief memorial lecture is a citizen's responsibility to society, a revisit to Anagarika Dharmapala's life and service. First, let's look at his life, who Dharmapala was. The Anagarika Dharmapala was born as Don David Hewavitarana on September 17, 1864 in Colombo, in British Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. So today is his 158th birth anniversary. David's parents were Don Karolis Hewavitarana, who was one of the wealthiest businessmen in Ceylon, and Mallika Dharmagunawardana. His younger brothers were Dr. Charles Alvis Hewavitarana and Edmund Hewavitarana. The Hewavitarana parents were ardently practicing Buddhists and taught their children how to read Buddhist sacred scripture daily and observed uposatha or precepts on Poya or full moon days. David grew up frequenting viharas and learning Buddha Dhamma from bhikkhus, especially from a well-known Buddhist monk, the Venerable Hikkhadwe Sri Sumangala Mahathera, who was one of the founders of Buddhist revivalist movement in British Ceylon, and was one of the founders and was the founder of Vidyodaya monastic college, which later became one of the National University of Sri Lanka, first Vidyodaya University, then the Sri Jayawardhanapura University. So thanks to his incredible knowledge in the world religions, Dharmapala, David, as a young man, it was much easier for him, Dharmapala, as David, as a young man, to become a humanist, as he grew up with a strong Buddhist upbringing and getting educated in a succession of Christian schools in British Ceylon. So it was a unique childhood. His alma maters were the Christian College of Corte, which was operated by Church Mission Society, St. Benedict's College of Cottahena, which was operated by Roman Catholics, and St. Thomas College of Mount Lavinia, which was operated by Anglicans, and at Colombo Academy, which is now the Colombo Royal College. He had lots of religious education. At home, he would listen to his parents, and personally, in his free time, he would frequent the temples. In school, he would get alone and interact with Christians and Catholics. So that's how he grew up, and that equipped him a remarkable knowledge in world religion. In 1894, David went to India, and when he returned to Ceylon, he changed his name to Anagarika Dharmapala. Anagarika literally means one who has left lay life. And Dharmapala means protector of the Dharma. And he lived, all his life he lived up to his name. That's another great lesson for us from him. In 1931, Anagarika was ordained as Venerable Sri Devamitta Dhammapala. On April 29, 1933, he passed away. And that is a sketch of his bio. Now let's look at his service. As I said at the beginning, I thought how to come up with how to organize some ideas into my brief lecture. And that's when I thought that I should look at him as a citizen who was specialized in different areas, different disciplines. So now we will now look at his service as a local citizen and global citizen. Nowadays we talk about globalization and how to be a global citizen. When you thoroughly study the service capacity of the Anagarika, and so he already had taught a way to become a global citizen. At the time, the mode of transportation between the continents was by a ship, not even aeroplanes. Air travel was very rare, but he already became a global citizen. Now, first let's look at Anagarika. Anagarika, the citizen, who was a great humanist. As an enthusiastic young student, Anagarika learned the religions of the world. As a practitioner of a humanistic, non-proselytizing Buddha Dhamma. Buddhism is non-proselytizing. Buddhism doesn't encourage conversion, hence non-proselytizing. So as a practitioner of a humanistic, non-proselytizing Buddha Dhamma, he emphasized that one religion should not oppress another religion for whatever reason. And freedom of religion must prevail. And as a young schoolboy, he was already deeply concerned about the violence in the Old Testament and consumption of meat. He was specifically concerned about beef consumption in a country which is home for Hindus as well. Hindus consider cow as a sacred animal. Later in his life, he toured the entire country promoting his humanism regarding the slaughter of cattle. One could question as to whether he practiced selective morality. Why only beef consumption? Not what about other animals? But you don't have to go that far. His motto for that humanistic movement was "Eat no beef, harak mas nokanu," in Sinhalese. Hindus deeply commended his movement. Also, cattle were largely instrumental to agriculture in Sri Lanka. Farmers would revere cattle. And his fight to save and preserve Buddhist sacred places like Bodh Gaya, where Bodhisattva Siddhartha attained spiritual enlightenment or Buddhahood, Saranath, where Buddha delivered his first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, or the discourse on the setting of the wheel of Dharma in motion, and Kusinara, where Buddha passed away. His humanism was crystal clear that it was not against other religions, but saving his own from the clutches of other religions. And that is he was very adamant about his philosophy, his freedom of religion, his ideas of freedom of religion. Now let's look at Anagarika the citizen, who was a practical philosopher. Thanks to his incredible knowledge in the world religions and exposure to the theosophical movement, he made the best Sri Lankan philosopher citizen out of himself. Theosophy, which is a term, is coined with the combination of theo, meaning God or divine, and Sophy, or Sophia, which is the Greek term, meaning thought or wisdom. So it is a number of philosophies. So Theosophy contains a number of philosophies, maintaining that a knowledge of God may be achieved through spiritual ecstasy, direct intuition, or special individual relationships. But later you will know that how our Anagarika got himself affiliated with another branch of Theosophical movement. In 1875, in New York City, the well-known Theosophical Society was established by 17 people. They were all scholars. And among them were Colonel Henry Steele Olcott and Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, William Quan Judge, Charles Sothern, George H. Feld, and George H. Feld. In August 1873, a famous interreligious debate, that we are very aware of, which is known as the Panadura debate, took place in Sri Lanka. Olcott and Blavatsky were so inspired by this debate that they traveled to Sri Lanka on the 17th of May 1880 and volunteered to formally embrace Buddha Dhamma. You might have noticed that I don't call it Buddhism. I use the word Buddha Dhamma, just to avoid the cultural interpretation, the cultural reinforcement of the Buddha's teachings. Buddhist Theosophy is then later they would form what is called the Buddhist Theosophical movement. It was a breakaway from the Theosophical movement that was founded in New York City. So the Buddhist Theosophy is a humanistic reductionism of theology in general. That's how I define it. Again, repeat, Buddhist Theosophy is a humanistic reductionism of theosophy in general. Such reductionism deeply inspired Olcott and Blavatsky. David was a 16-year-old inquisitive young man when Olcott and Blavatsky embraced Buddha Dhamma. David became a follower of Buddhist Theosophy since it perfectly fitted into humanism that Buddha Dhamma upholds. It would keep him inspired for the rest of his life. Next, let's look at Anagarika, the citizen who was a spiritual healer. When Anagarika represented Buddha Dhamma at the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago in September 1893, he spoke in a way that his audience felt connected with him. To his audience, he was more than a representative of a world religion. He was a healer. As Professor George Bond of Northwestern University at Chicago mentioned to me, I consider George Bond as one of my mentors. His audience got inspired by Anagarika owing to his emphasis on the Buddhist ideals of tolerance and gentleness, as those ideals are crucial for the world's religions in modern times. In modern times, people would hate proselytization, crusades, and all that. And Dharmapala, he attended the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. At the time, people were already feeling the brunt of proselytizing religions. And that's one of the reasons behind the World Parliament of Religion. So, and among his audience was one enthusiastic listener, Charles Strauss, who was a businessman from New York City. Charles was the first American to embrace Buddha Dhamma on American soil. And he embraced Buddhism from under Anagarika Dharmapala. And I met his descendants in New York City. And they are still in business. So Charles invited Anagarika to officiate a simple ceremony at which Charles took refuge in Tisarana. Tisarana, as you know, taking refuge in Buddha Dharma and the Sangha. And on his return to Sri Lanka from the US mainland via Hawaii, Anagarika met Mary Robinson Foster, who was a Hawaiian American philanthropist, who was a descendant of King Kamehameha of the Kingdom of Hawaii. You can see everyone, those who come to the temple would see Madam Mary Foster's picture hanging in the other hall, on the wall, in the other hall. So she had royal blood. She was connected to the King of Hawaii. Mary Foster had been suffering from some emotional problems. So our Anagarika, as a healer, consoled her problems by using Buddhist therapeutic techniques. Foster was so deeply motivated by our healer that she donated him an enormous amount of money. Anagarika used all that money to finance the founding in 1926 of the London Buddhist Vihara at the Foster House in Ealing. And that's the history that you all know. Foster was the first Hawaiian American Buddhist. So it is remarkable that Anagarika was able to meet all these first Buddhists and spirituals and people. Foster was a wealthy business person. One reason for Foster's emotional problems was the overthrow in 1893 of her close kin and friend, Queen Lydia Liliu Loluku Walania Kamakaiha. I met some of her great-great-granddaughters in Hawaii when I visited Hawaii, and I also paid a visit to the Botry and the Foster Garden in Hawaii. And that was planted by Mary Foster. The Queen, she was the last sovereign monarch of the Hawaiian Kingdom. The Queen was imprisoned at Lolani Palace, and Foster was one of the two friends that were permitted to visit her during her imprisonment by American military. Our Anagarika brought Foster a lifelong solace. There was another reason why Foster deeply respected our Anagarika. Despite his being a citizen of an oppressed nation, he healed Foster, a citizen of another oppressed nation. So that brought them into middle grounds, and that would pave the way for them to have discussions in humanism and spirituality in detail. At the invitation of a German-American, Dr. Paul Carus, C-A-R-U-S, Carus is the American pronunciation, European pronunciation is Carus, so whichever is it. So Dr. Paul Carus, Anagarika returned to America in 1896. Dr. Carus was a theologian. However, he questioned his faith and had become more inclined towards atheism. He called himself, quote unquote, an atheist who loved God. He promoted interfaith dialogue and explored the possibility of scientific dialogue on religion. Carus liked the teachings of Dr. D.T. Suzuki and Zen Buddhist master Zoyen Shaku, both Japanese. Carus and Anagarika met each other on the sidelines of the 1893 session of the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago. Keras was so inspired by Anagarika's humanistic perspective on religion that he accepted Anagarika as one of his mentor friends. Keras strived to steer a middle course between idealistic metaphysics and materialism. His belief, therefore, was a kind of middle path, or close to the Buddhist teaching of middle path or Majjhima Patipada. Anagarika helped Dr. Keras get lots of things clarified regarding religion, because Anagarika was well versed in Christianity, Old Testament and New Testament. Again, between 1902 and 1904, our Anagarika visited America several times and taught Buddha Dhamma and healed many people. His teaching sessions were palatable to his Western audience, since he simply rejected what he called the cultural reinforcement of Buddha Dhamma and always presented it in a psychological perspective. Therefore, he was able to prove the timelessness or akalika identity of Buddha Dhamma. That's how we define Buddha Dhamma, akaliko. Anagarika, now let's look at Anagarika the citizen, who was an efficient entrepreneur. Coming from a wealthy business family, Anagarika grew up watching his family run business. He therefore did not have to acquire business skills anew. He used his entrepreneurial skills to encourage the people across Sri Lanka to invest in textile industry. Those days, Sri Lanka was famous for handloom industry. The Sinhalese word is Pesha Karma. It's very interesting. It is so interesting, the term Pesha Karma. Pesha means muscles. Karma means action. You use your muscles for handlooms. That's what it means, Pesha Karma. And he promoted handloom industry across the country. When I visited Jaffna the last time, I met some Tamil Brahmins, and they highly commended Dharmapala for promoting handloom industry in Jaffna as well. Now let's look at Anagarika the citizen, who was an efficient professional. I could get access to some of the diary notes through Venerable Neluvay Ratanatissa Mahathera from Washington, D.C., USA. He was ordained at Bodh Gaya, at Mahabodhi. And his diary notes prove his professionalism and standard of his work ethics. Being the pioneer in saving the Buddhist heritage in India and Sri Lanka, and in preserving Buddha Dhamma for future generations, he had to go through untold difficulties and pains. He therefore wanted others, especially people in his inner circle, to maintain professionalism and a higher standard of work ethics. His leadership was fundamentally built upon two of the Rajadharmas, or principles of good governance. That is to say, Ajjava, or uprightness, and Madhava, or softness. Those who got his attention due to their poor performance included bhikkhus as well, monks. In his diary notes and written correspondence to Sri Lanka from India, Anagarika advised some of his colleagues not to send slack bhikkhus to India for Dhammaduta service. He would appear tough in his words because of his Ajjava principle, but was extremely soft in his heart because of his Madhava principle. Ajjava and Madhava are two of the 10 Rajadharmas, or principles of governance. Now, there's much more to say, but I never want to carry forward because, as I said at the beginning, there is literature in abundance, videos and speeches in his name that would commend his life and service. I simply wanted to get your attention and look at Anagarika Dharmapala in a different perspective. That's why I came up with the different roles that he played as a citizen. Now, let me end my brief speech on the life and service of Anagarika Dharmapala by saying that he was not only one of the extraordinary citizens of Sri Lanka, but also a global citizen, as I mentioned at the beginning. As a local citizen, Anagarika left evergreen spiritual imprints in the religious history of Sri Lanka. As a global citizen, he left the same in the religious histories of America, Canada, England, France, Germany and Japan, just to name a few. He could have been selfish and built a huge business empire because he had lots of connections on the global level. Instead, he was selfless and sacrificed his wealth, time and labor, and talents to serve his country and the world. He was a bodhisattva of modern times. Now, before I end, I would like to suggest some recommendations. When I visited the Carleton University in Canada, they have a chair in Ambedkar studies. And in different universities of the world have Gandhi studies. And Professor George Bond and other Western professors suggested me, when I spoke with them in our dialogues, that there should be an endowment chair in the name of Anagarika Dharmapala in a religious studies department or college in the Western country like in England. Because there are so many students willing to study the Anagarika Dharmapala. That being said, thank you very much for inviting me and listening to me. That's all I could say today. Thanks a lot. Buddha Saranai. Oh yes. Do you have any questions? Yeah. Maybe not. Thank you. Oh yes. Yeah.
So Bhante, with Anagarika, obviously he's the founder of our Vihari.
Yeah.
How would you say that he would like, and one of his great wishes was to bring the Dhamma to Britain and to spread it among Western audiences. How do you think that should be approached now in today's world?
Yeah, in the today's world, actually, now that the world has seen cutting-edge technology, or some people call it bleeding edge technology, much sharper. So I guess if you fail to bring the Buddha Dhamma into the West and explain it, present it in a way that the Westerners are able to integrate it into their way of thinking. In so doing, nowadays we are not able to come up with an excuse. Dharmapala could very easily do that. At the time, there was little or no communication between different countries. But I already mentioned that why his audience, Western audience, was very receptive to his lectures, his teachings, was that he simply rejected the cultural version and the reinforcement of Buddha Dhamma. Now another scholar, another American scholar, I had lots of dialogues with him, and he said that there are two kinds of congregations as per the Buddhist congregations in the Western world. Ethnic congregations and Western congregations. So ethnic congregations are more into preserving their cultural values that the immigrants have brought with them, whereas the other type of congregation, they are not concerned about preservation of culture, and their concern is about the propagation of Dhamma. So that's a big difference. So that is why I always see that I'm not saying that because I am here at London Buddhist Vihara, I'm not praising you. That since its inception, London Buddhist Vihara has maintained its identity as an institution, as an institute of intellectual, an intellectual seat of learning. At the same time, accommodating people from different ethnic Buddhist backgrounds. So this is a place where, and Dharmapala, his concern was that whosoever come into the West should be able to present the Buddha Dhamma in a universal sense. Universal means in a psychological sense. Unless it is presented in a psychological perspective, as opposed to a cultural perspective, when there are no more immigrants coming to the West, and the Westerners wouldn't be able to have Buddhism wouldn't be palatable to the Western audience. In early days in America, up until I think up to the start of the new millennium, even to these days, some Westerners think Buddhism is nothing but burning incense, and doing chanting, and paying respect to monks. This is my first-hand experience with the Westerners, whereas they want us implementing and performing Buddhist spiritual missions to present the Dharma in a way that it makes sense. I think that is the whole reason why when Venerable Mahinda, where Arahat Mahinda traveled to Sri Lanka with the message of Buddhism, so when King Devanampitis, I'm always inspired by Venerable Arahat Mahinda's answer to the King Devanampitis. When the king asked Venerable Arahat Mahinda whether Buddhism was now established, taken root in Sri Lankan soil, having preached, having described a lot of Buddha Dhamma, Arahat Mahinda said, no. Why not? He said, up until a locally born and raised citizen becomes a monk, Your Majesty, you can't say that Buddha Dhamma has taken root on Sri Lankan soil, on Lankan soil. Why? What it means by that is, it has to, a local citizen must be given a chance to integrate the universal akalika timeless Dharma into his way of thinking. So that is, I'm always inspired by Arahat Mahinda's answer to King Devanampitis. And Buddha himself, before that, in different parts of the canon, the Buddhist canon, Buddha would advise monks who were sent on missions in one place. When he was as part of a piece of advice that he gave a monk, and Buddha said, when you go to a place like that, you don't call alms ball patta. Be careful. Patta is a bad word in that region. You have to be very careful of the terms that you use. Learn the language. In that particular area, alms ball is called sara, not patta. And when you go to certain communities, they are known for their violent behavior. they easily get agitated. Understand their cultural awareness, their approach. So we come across that advice in the Buddha's teachings, and then from the answer to Venerable Arahat Mahinda's answer to King Devanampitis. Now, so that is why I think there should be, sadly though, from time to time, Sri Lankan governments come into power from time to time. They visit Western Buddhist temple running on Western soil, and they get inspired by the way Buddhist monks implement and perform their spiritual missions. And for the moment, they would say that, okay, we must have a place to train missionary monks. It has never been the practice. It's very difficult to find qualified monks, right? But lucky, the last time when I was in Sri Lanka and Thailand and Burma, all those people and monks in those countries told me the same thing. There is this spiritual brain drain. Usually we talk about brain drain when it comes to professionals like engineers, doctors. But it was an eye-opening to me when a minister in Thailand told me, we have to think about the brain drain of Buddhist monks too, because all the best monks are in the West now. I said the same thing in Sri Lanka too. So, in a way that you are much lucky. So part of my response is that there should be a way to encourage Buddhist monks. Whenever you get Buddhist monks here, it's better to send them to direct them towards part-time studies in English and other subjects. It happens in America. When I moved to America in 1999, the congregation approached me and told me, from tomorrow onwards, you must enroll yourself in English classes. Well, again, you don't need, but there was a few more monks, and they must enroll themselves and learn other religions. There are free courses in world religion and English because they need exposure. And always hang around with Westerners. That's a must. But it happens here at London Buddhist Vihara a lot. So that being said, I think that's, and one more thing to say, that part of that. Now, in a few years' time, there'll still be immigrant Buddhists might immigrate into these countries. But based on what has been happening in predominantly Buddhist countries, so there is less and less attention to spiritual education in Sri Lanka. Probably in 20 years' time, there will be still Sri Lankans and other ethnic Asians coming to England, for example, but they wouldn't know any Buddhism. So that is when I always personally feel that there must be a lot of space for youngsters. There should be classes only for youngsters, and those youngsters, they should be put in the same class, like your children born to ethnic Buddhist parents, as well as the children born to non-Buddhist families here in the West. It's happening. You have Sunday school, but I would feel like there should be applied Buddhist studies. For example, in America, a lot of temples have their own curricula, spiritual studies, because sometimes there's no way to. It's time to change the syllabi. It's time to change, rewrite all the Buddhism books that are all available in 500 years old English. So these are practical stuff that I would always talk about scholars in Sri Lanka and different countries. And there must be a place. For example, a lot of children come to this temple, London Buddhist Vihara, and they ask questions about euthanasia, clinical death, mercy killing, embryonic research cell, embryonic place, and and all that, euthanasia and all that. And then they should be able to, and there are a lot of questions regarding medical and bioethics. So that's where the spirituality is going now. Those are the things that we need to address. Because lots of children have told me on personal level, Bhante, we could very easily download all the Buddhism lessons from Google, but we need some critical answers to certain critical questions that we always want you to answer. So that's where, and Anagarika Dharmapala always started that decades ago. That's why his teachings were well, his audience, Western audiences were well receptive to his teaching. That is why that the German-American philosopher, theologian, Dr. Keyers, and then the businessman from New York, and Mary Foster and all that. So they were deeply inspired by Anagarika Dharmapala's presentations. Had he presented Dharma and a traditional account of Dharma, he wouldn't have come this far. He wouldn't have made history. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
I remember having discussion with your great length late into the night when you were here
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
before the COVID.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning how you used to conduct these classes, which I was very concerned about the same things that you were raising and listening to you. How could you make this temple? That's how I must say. Because the purpose of the temple was not to serve only the migrants or immigrants who have come here, but for this to be a place where the Western mind could discuss and get their answers, because they are obviously seekers, wanting to know more about ultimate truth. And I remember you telling me at that time that one of the things that you realized was that you couldn't mix the two audiences. So you kept the microphone, the immigrants of the separately, because the questions and the kind of things that people wanted to know was sometimes taboo to even be spoken about.
Yes.
And you were very particular, and in fact I was telling you I wish you could have a discussion with the monks here with you, that you know what that you have to go, because it was so vital. So what I want to know is after what, maybe about 3 or 4 years since we had that discussion, how do you feel that we have moved, and what do you see? Because I see when you go to other temples, which are Theravada, where there are more Western monks, or from other, not particularly ethnic monks, where a lot of Westerners do come, because the questions which are asked are very relevant, and you don't have to, I mean, you don't only, you take the teachings from the Tripitaka, but you can, they are very aware of all the topics that you say, but they are very aware of epigenetics. You've got to talk about that. You've got to speak about things like quantum physics, because that's what is actually proving everything that the Buddha saw over 2,500 years ago without any of the ceremonial reports, lands or anything. And that's a discussion that inspires me, because I find that, you know those. And I must say, I've come across 1 or 2 months or still in Sri Lanka, but in Sinhalese, who they speak, and for me that is not so easy to follow. That's why I prefer to go to Western monks, because English is easier for me. But I have recently done a retreat also, and I was amazed that they could talk about, things like the unified field and and the knowledge. So there are, even in Sri Lanka, 1 or 2 months, every conversion, but who are looking at these things, because that's what the Westerners are always looking at. It's freely available. And the wonder for us as Buddhists born in our country is the families who have for generations been upholding these traditions, is that now the Westerners are interested, and we've got all this at the back from so many years ago. or any of the modern things like you could see bacteria with a microscope for an instant.
Yes.
So I just want to know, how are we progressing on that? And do you see we can merge these audiences? Now you've been here for quite some time. I would like
Yeah,
to know.
it's possible to merge all these audiences, but the thing is, basically, we get monks from Asia, and every time I go to Sri Lanka, I meet the education authorities, and I always say that even the monastic curricula have to be amended. For example, when I was a Samanera novice monk, I wasn't allowed to study science. Before becoming a monk, I would score 100% in my for science, maths, and English. The English is the only one that I never dropped. I kept it for some personal history. So that is one thing. But nowadays there are young scholars in Sri Lanka who are English educated. So the next part of the answer is going to be definitely political. So far I haven't used a single political term during my brief talk. So since Sri Lanka education system was switched back to Sinhala and Tamil medium, so a disaster started happening. For example, my own professor of Pali, because of him I got specialized in, I thought I should enroll in special bachelor's program in Pali studies. Most venerable Professor Kakapalli Anuruddha Mahathera, Nayaka Thera. And he got a PhD from Lancaster, and he was a professor at Hong Kong and Santa Barbara. And so he told me that he was the last batch of English medium students from Peradeniya. So after that, it was switched to Sinhala medium, and even his own younger monks went down in, they lost their intellectual vigor. But nowadays again, there are lots of young scholars coming up, but at the same time, there should be, so the monastic curricula needs to be critically amended to accommodate other subjects. For example, as you mentioned as a medical expert, so whenever I talk about anicca, we always relate quantum physics and anicca, so impermanence. From zero comes everything. When everything goes back to zero, there's nothing. So nothing and everything is based on zero, and below zero is core. So, and we talk about everything start from zero. So everything goes back to zero. So that's all about the layman's understanding of quantum physics. There's anicca, impermanence. Even though it is such, maybe it looks like a very simple comparison, but that's where that is the seed of a long intellectual, scientific dialogue on Buddhism. Yeah, that's what we need. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
It is a very inspiring speech for all of us regarding the history and also culture and philosophy and Western society. All these areas have been covered by the Bante's talk. We have to give thanks to him. Actually, he has given good ideas for all of us, how to establish Buddhism in the Western countries. So I don't take any more time to give a speech here. I want to thank him. I'm very grateful for your speech, Bhante. As I said, he is very busy giving so many speeches via online. Zoom system highly used by Bhante. Even at night, he was sleepless. I asked why you have taken so many responsibilities, and I said, he also talked with me. One day I said, "Sastre danagat vedarala hata netre nidhi netre tuyamata." I said that. Who knows medicine properly, he can't sleep even night because he knows everything. That is the meaning of that Sinhalese poem. Sastre danagat vedaralata netre nidinetare tunyamata. He doesn't sleep actually until midnight. You don't believe, he take the class in the morning at 3 a.m. That is to Malaysia. He is giving lecture from 3 a.m. to 6. I can't do it. Every Sunday, that is the Dhamma school in Malaysia. And again, America is utterly different, and he takes class to America as well. And no time to sleep. Such a busy and dedicated monk, is great. I have a great respect to him. On behalf of our Dayakas, Bhante, thank you so much. Wholeheartedly, I convey my gratitude to you for sharing your time with the talk today. We all have to think about citizens' responsibility towards the society. Anagarika Dharmapala understood his responsibility, what to do, and he had done his service. We are responsible for the sasana, something, not to do something for our own job and family business. There is a responsibility. The results of Dharmapala's responsibility, we enjoy it today, and we have to contribute for as citizen, what to do for the sasana. Thank you so much, Bhante. I appreciate very much. Now we conclude, and we have a little puja. Then we garland the statue of Anagarika Dharmapala. Then we do the puja and start at 7:30. Is that Pirikara? It is a good idea. I also would like to contribute. You can do it. Yeah.
चक्रवडङ्कित रत्न सुपादो लखन मंडित आयत पानी चामर छत्र विभूषित पादो ऐसा ही तुई है पिता नारसिंह के कुमार वारो सुख लक्खन विद्धत पुण्य शरीरो लोकहिताय गातो नारवीरो ऐसहि तुई है पिता नारसिंहो पुण्य सशंख निभो मुख वन्नो देव नारायण पियो नार नागो मत्त गजिंद विलासित गामी ऐसहि तुई है पिता नारसिंहो खत्तिय